and welcome to another edition of the Skillwork Forum. This podcast exists to help leaders and companies that are looking for innovative solutions to help solve your skilled labor shortage challenge wherever you happen to be across the country. I'm Tim. This is Brett, my partner. We're from Skillwork, and today we're going to be talking about something none of us really want to think about. It's kind of one of those things like, don't mention it. Maybe it won't happen. But we need to, and that is the possible return. We're starting to see some of the trends that are pointing into the idea, the possibility that we could have a return of COVID-19 levels that might force another partial shutdown or might impact our businesses. So listen in and see if your company could benefit from some of the lessons learned that we've been able to gather working with some of our clients in our own business, and see if you're prepared should COVID raise its ugly head again. So during round one of COVID, we all lived through it, and really we're kind of still in it. One would hope on the tail end of it, but unprecedented impact to all the sectors we serve: manufacturing, transportation, construction, all the support services around those where the skilled labor exists. So supply chains were disrupted, if not completely broken. Some of your customer bases disappeared. Certainly workers, in a lot of cases, furloughed. Some are still furloughed. A lot of people learned how to work remote or tried to persevere through remote or virtual work environments. A lot of you had to learn, and we had to learn how to work under COVID-safe conditions. So many of us, thank goodness, have rebounded. Our business has rebounded, and we're turning things around, or at least we're beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Some companies and domains, industries, obviously more than others. But another shutdown would really have devastating effects if we're not prepared. And that's kind of what we want to talk about today, Brett, where some sectors we noticed they kind of thrived and they adopted. So what did they do? What have they done? What are they doing? And what are some of the things we noticed as we work with some of our clients?
Yeah, exactly, Tim. So I think, when the original, COVID 1.0, I guess we'll call it, right. When it hit, we just didn't know what we didn't know. Nobody knew. The experts didn't know. We were all and so you're scrambling to kind of figure it out. A sector that one I'm very familiar with, and two, as a business that we work a lot in, is the food and beverage space. And I think it's interesting if you look at that as an example, because that is a sector that was considered essential. They needed to continue to operate in order to be able to provide food supply to the country. And so where some businesses could literally just go remote, kind of separate and learn to function that way, which was a portion. Obviously, we did that in our office for a period of time.
Right.
But in that world, in the food and beverage manufacturing space, that wasn't an option. They had to figure out how to continue to operate and keep their employees safe. It's an industry that, by nature, prior to any COVID, it was a very controlled environment anyhow because of food safety and that type of thing. But this was a whole new element, and it's an industry for the most part, not all, but probably more than more this way than not, and that is that there's a lot of employees in these facilities. Some of the facilities that we provide employees into, there's as many as 4,000 employees in some of these plants.
Under a single roof.
Under a single roof. Yeah.
Right.
Now big, they're large facilities, and they're not huddled in a, but there's a lot of them.
Right.
And that added to the challenge of that. And so, Tim and I have talked about it and said, as we watched that process of, obviously during the original COVID outbreak and the spread, and as those facilities, it was on the news a lot, obviously in the food manufacturing, you saw big spikes, in numbers. And so because they obviously weren't staying home, they were coming to work, and
right.
they were there. So they had to learn over a process of months, really, as to how they were going to work through that. I personally believe, because we're close to it, if you look today at where they are and how they were able to really get control, I think there's a lot to be learned in that, in what they did to get it under control, that I think a lot of businesses could probably learn from that. I don't want to get into whether kids should go to school or not go to school or those kind of things, but I do think there's opportunity to learn, hey, they've continued to operate, and now you don't hear near as much, as they continue to be diligent about the outbreaks in these facilities. I mean, we're in lots of them.
Right.
And so.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to watch. The other thing, we're in the skilled trades business, and it was really interesting to see, we talked about essential versus non-essential on a previous podcast, and that a lot of these guys that we work with were deemed not only their business being critical, but those particular people were critical to those facilities. So a lot of facilities, even when they did partial shutdowns or even full shutdowns, those skilled trades guys, the maintenance technicians, the folks that we put there, they were showing up and working. Yep. So it really kind of helped me crystallize the idea of how important these folks are to our economy and to industry. So as Brett said, we watch this food and beverage manufacturing sector to a large degree because they can't work remote. They have to be able to persevere. And a lot of us are looking at that going to COVID 2.0, and how did these companies that had to keep going, how did they get past the point where there were hotspots? So some of the things that they implemented that we saw were very aggressive testing and monitoring. We have clients right now that anybody that comes, especially a new employee that comes there, has to be tested. They have to, they can't begin to work at the facility until they come back and get a negative result. And if there's any question, they have to get tested again, and they remain in quarantine until they get that positive result. So aggressive testing, and then the monitoring every day. Employees coming in and out get their temperature taken, get checked for symptoms. They have increased staff on site that are nursing or medical professionals that are there to assess things as they are, and they're very, very aggressive about minimizing and mitigating impact. So there's some other things that they're doing there too that we've noticed.
Yeah, no, for sure. So as Tim said, I think the first thing was they had the outbreak, and so that just became a real reality. We've got to figure out how to deal with this. As Tim said, they did. We heard a lot about it early on, is that you're going to have we're going to have to learn to control the hot spots. Well, these food plants became the hot spots.
They did.
And so most of them that we know, for the most part, through the support of the states and the testing, and they became first in line to be able to get tested in that. And so they basically tested their entire workforces. So once they had done that, they took the people out that were positive, let them quarantine, brought them back in a controlled environment. You've basically, not totally, because obviously these people are going home each night and that type of thing, but you're hoping that people will use good discretion and those types of things. But you got control of the situation.
Yeah.
You controlled, and then during that time, part of the reason why a lot of these skilled maintenance techs and stuff continued to work during some of the shutdowns. During those shutdowns, they were getting everybody healthy after they got them all tested, and then they were putting in a lot of workplace barriers. They were learning to separate, a lot of plexiglass, a lot of different things, changed their break rooms. So they did all of these things. They also, and we're continuing to see this, they had to furlough some of the companies that were aggressive in really watching out for the safety of their employees. They furloughed people with risk and 60 and above. We saw some companies that just picked that number and said anybody 60 and above, we're going to furlough them until we we have a better handle on this. At this point, as we look at the potential of 2.0 and how to manage through it without shutting the economy down, most likely you're going to have to continue to furlough some of those people until we probably have a vaccine.
Yeah, and so there's a double-edged sword of that. You're protecting your in a lot of cases, your most experienced, most qualified people that you have, because when you're 55 plus, you've probably been there for a long time. You know the facility in and out. So there's a big impact of furlough on those, but for safety and concern, you do that. But that also presents a risk to your company and an opportunity to also augment your workforce with companies like what we provide, and we've done that in many cases, temporarily come in and augment a workforce while the COVID-19 mitigation steps are put in place, and we can help a company overcome that period where they may be shy a third or so of their workforce until they can get things stabilized again. So preparing for COVID 2.0, have you thought about, has your company thought about, what would I do if I lost a third of my skilled maintenance or skilled craftsmen? What would we do to be able to continue to stay in business? And that's where you can plan ahead and be thinking about preparing for potential onslaught of this virus again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you look at all of that. I think we use the example of the food and beverage to, I guess, encourage companies. If you want to look at an example as we look to open up different pockets of people, whether it's an office or whatever, I just think there's something to be learned. They learned how to adjust to the situation. It's not perfect. I mean, there's still people that are getting are coming down positive with COVID, and they're having to deal with it the same way. But by far the numbers and in these locations that we're in, the number of people who are out or sick is dramatically. They pretty much have everybody back for the most part.
Right.
So I just think there's as other companies, whether it's construction, and we work with construction companies too, and we saw them doing some similar things where they really clamped down on their job sites in a similar way, and really, they didn't have visitors coming. They were doing remote meetings. They were putting their groups in their workers in groups of 10.
Mm-hmm.
All these different things. So I think as an economy as a whole, as other companies look and go, well, how? Because today we still have some companies, especially offices, that have not opened back up.
Right, a lot of them
continue to be remote, and maybe that's the best for them to continue to do that. But I do think there's some examples who have managed through this. I think some of these food and beverage companies, have really deserve a lot of credit for
I think they do.
what they've done.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this. The general narrative that you hear a lot of times, and this gets to one of our core values, which is respect to our skilled tradespeople. The narrative you hear a lot is that, well, we can solve this by working virtual and working remote. And I just want to hit on that again, that what these men and women do that do our skilled trades and the people that we work with and we're blessed to employ, they're hands-on, and their work in almost every case can't be done virtually or remotely, at least not fully and effectively. So it's crucial that we figure out how to make sure that they can get to work and work safely. And I think you made a good point, Brett, that let's take some of these lessons learned and apply it to things like schools that we're trying to figure out how to open again. How do you get an environment set up where people can test, can work in relative safety as we persevere through this as a country? So one of our friends has a saying that they like to say all the time is, be ready so you don't have to get ready. And I think that's important. So leaning forward and trying to think now about, rather than just kind of say, well, we've got through it, we've muscled our way through it, and now let's just get back to normal. That may not be an option for us as we transition into what appears to be a potential, another peak or spike in the COVID-19.
Yeah, I think it's not coming as a surprise this time. I mean, we may not like it. We may not like the fact that the numbers are back up or whatever they are. But the reality is we now have lived through since March, at least, a little bit before in some cases, we've lived through this experience. And so our encouragement to ourselves and to you out there in, running businesses is we can learn from that. This, if there is a second wave that we have to deal with, it's not going to be at the same level of surprise as it was the first time. And so what can you do? We were learning on the fly before. We were figuring out how to work remote. We were figuring out how to do virtual. We were figuring out, okay, do we monitor? Do we test? Do you, once you get your environment, I think one of the things that a lot of companies, ours included, and a lot of the clients that we have is you need to be flexible. You need to understand not everybody's in the same spot. You really need to have pretty strict policy. I think in this season, it's okay to say, hey, if before somebody may have had a fever on a Saturday, I feel okay on Sunday, I come to work on Monday. And today you really have to think about your fellow employees and really say, hey, give it a few days, and if your symptoms are not, if you're not free of any symptoms for at least 72 hours, don't go. If we continue to do that past COVID, we'd probably cut out a lot of illness in the workplace.
That's another benefit. We're going to use this to apply to a lot. COVID is not the only virus. It's not the last virus. So as humans, we've gotten through these, multiple times, and we'll get through this one. There's some practical things you can do. We've talked about many of them here. I'm sure you have your own lessons learned. I would, take a hard look at those things and think about how you might prepare should you get faced with these again, and remain diligent, cautious, but don't overreact. I mean, we can get through this. And take a look at the food and beverage industry. If you want to talk more about that specifically with us, that we may be able to give you more detail about some of those things that they've learned that you may be able to apply to your business, whether it be manufacturing, construction, or any of the trades or businesses that support the trades, we'd love to talk to you. Just reach out to us. So hopefully this gave you some things to think about and to consider how you might react or prepare in the event we have to face another round of COVID impacts. So our hope and prayer, frankly, is that we do not. Trusting God, as always, in all things. He is still on the throne, and He's in control, and we trust Him for these things as well. But Ronald Reagan once famously said, hope is not a strategy. So while we hope it doesn't come, we will put some things into practice, and hopefully this will get you to think about some of those things. So thanks for joining us today on the Skillwork Forum. For more information on how your company can overcome not only this, but all of the challenges related to the skilled labor shortage in America, please visit us at skillwork.com. Thank you.